The cabin lights hummed softly, casting a pale glow over the rows of seats as Flight 317 cruised steadily over the darkened plains below. Outside, the moon hung low in the sky, a silent sentinel illuminated by the stars. Inside, there was laughter and conversation, a steady murmur of relaxation as passengers settled into the long-haul journey. A mother gently soothed her restless toddler. A businessman tapped away on his laptop, and a young couple nestled close, sharing headphones and planning their first vacation together. All was routine. All was normal. At 10:42 p.m., the flight attendant, Maria Thompson, made her final beverage run. She offered smiles and soft words to weary travelers, her feet moving with practiced grace down the narrow aisle. Just ahead, I sat in seat 17B, clutching the armrests, lost in thought. I was returning home after weeks abroad, my mind dancing between excitement and exhaustion. I remember the faint hum of the engines, the gentle sway of the fuselage, and the unmistakable click of seatbelts being fastened as we prepared to begin our descent. Then, without warning, the world lurched. It happened so fast that my brain struggled to process the sudden violence. One moment, the cabin was calm. The next, we were plunged into chaos. The engines roared louder, as if enraged by some unseen force. Overhead bins rattled, overhead lights flickered, and oxygen masks dangled down like ghostly serpents. A thunderous crack, sharp, bone-chilling, reverberated through the hull. The airplane shuddered violently, twisting as though caught in the jaws of a colossal beast. Panic erupted. Screams, high-pitched, urgent, slashed through the air. I heard a woman's terrified cry right behind me. "Oh God, oh God, oh God!" Passengers lunged toward the aisle, faces contorted in fear. Maria, the flight attendant, fought her way back against the tide of bodies, her uniform soaked in sweat. She struggled to reach the intercom, her hand shaken as she tried to deliver instructions that barely made sense through the cascading cacophony. I grasped the armrests with every ounce of strength, my knuckles white. My heart thundered against my ribs. Time seemed to fracture. Seconds stretched into eternity. I could feel the metallic taste of panic on my tongue, each breath shallow and ragged. The cabin lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness for a heartbeat before snapping back on, each flash illuminating terrified eyes, twisted masks of despair. I remember the sensation of falling, like being dropped from a great height, and then the snap of impact. The roar of tearing metal, the sacrificial crunch of aluminum yielding to fate. Fire raced along one wing, embers drifting into the cabin like malevolent sparks. Smoke curled in acrid wisps, stinging eyes and coating throats. A hot, choking haze suffocated us from above. Amid the bedlam, I heard them, the screams, not just of fear, but of agony, of disbelief. A man's voice cracked as he shouted for his wife. Children wailed, their small bodies trembling. Voices melded into a deafening chorus of pain and terror. I heard a guttural plea, "Help me!" And I saw hands, fingers curled, nails sinking into fabric, reaching for something, anything to hold on to. And yet, in that moment of ultimate horror, I felt something else, a fragile strand of hope. Maria's voice, trembling but determined, cut through the din. "Brace, brace, head down, stay down." Her words were faint but urgent. I bent forward instinctively, pressing my forehead against my knees, arms wrapped tightly around my head. I felt the world tilt, heave, then still, an eerie, suspended silence. When I dared to lift my head, the cabin was unrecognizable. Seats were twisted, shards of debris littered the aisle. Smoke hung heavy, a living thing that clung to every surface. Some passengers were motionless, while others moaned softly. The emergency lighting cast a blood-red glow, painting the scene in apocalyptic hues. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling. The emergency exit row was just ahead, and I stumbled toward it, my vision blurrier with every step. I heard more screams, some of fear, some of relief, as passengers realized escape might be possible. Flames licked at the doorframe, but the exit opened with a scream of metal. The inflatable slide dangled outside, swaying in the wind. I didn't look back. I climbed out onto the slide, heart pounding like a jackhammer. I slid down into the cool night air, chest heaving. Behind me, the once mighty aircraft groaned, its engines quiet now, victims of their own final roar. I landed in the grass, the sulfuric smell of leaking fuel heavy in my nostrils. As I stumbled away, I turned back and saw the wing engulfed in flames. The screams continued, echoes of that fateful moment, until the fire seemed to swallow every sound. Then, in the darkness, only the crackling of fire remained. I sank to my knees, tears carving paths down my soot-streaked face. My clothes were torn, my body bruised, but I was alive. The screams had finally ceased, but their memory would never fade. When the night air hit me, it felt like a baptism, cold and sudden after the inferno behind me. I rolled off the slide and onto damp grass, the world spinning as adrenaline surged through every fiber of my being. All around me, passengers spilled onto the field, dazed and bleeding, faces streaked with soot and tears. The hush of the crash site was surreal. The roar of the engines had died. The fuselage lay broken like a discarded toy, and only the crackling of flames and distant shouts of first responders punctuated the darkness. Instinct pushed me forward. I brushed past a young man clutching his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "Are you okay?" I gasped, voice raw. He nodded weakly, eyes glazed with shock. We turned toward the blaze to find more survivors. A flight attendant, her uniform torn and singed, knelt beside a small child who whimpered, clutching a teddy bear blackened at the edges. The attendant's gentle fingers pressed the child's trembling shoulder. "You're safe now," she whispered, voice cracking but unwavering. Sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder as emergency vehicles sped down the service road toward us. Floodlights swung into position, bathing the wreckage in harsh white light. Firefighters in heavy gear charged forward, spraying jets of water at the burning wing, their faces hidden behind visors. Paramedics rushed among the scattered bodies, assessing who could walk, who needed stretcher, and who, God forbid, had already slipped away. I found my legs stepping toward a smoky haze near the center of the fuselage, where a man lay half buried under debris. His face was pale, eyes closed, breathing shallow. Without thinking, I crouched beside him, pressing my hand over the jagged metal pinning his leg. The heat seared through the fabric of my shirt. "Hang in there," I breathed, voice barely audible over the chaos. A firefighter knelt beside me and nodded, positioning a hydraulic cutter. Together, we lifted the twisted aluminum, just enough for paramedics to slide a stretcher underneath. The man groaned as they lifted him away. I watched until he was safe. Nearby, a group of passengers huddled around an elderly woman who sat on the ground, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She clutched her purse and stared blankly ahead. I offered her my water bottle. She took a sip, hands trembling. "I can't believe we're alive," she whispered. "I keep hearing the screams in my head." I held her gaze. "We're alive together," I said softly. "We'll make it through this together." The rescue operation moved with precision. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars formed a ring around the wreck. Floodlights illuminated every shattered window and snapped beam. An orange glow still glimmered at the wingtip where the fire refused to die. The roar of cutting torches replaced the brief lull as crews worked to separate sections of the fuselage for access. A paramedic bent over a young woman whose leg was twisted unnaturally. Her eyes fluttered open, terror etched in every line of her face. I knelt beside her, taking her hand. "You're safe," I said. "Help is here." Her grip tightened. Her voice was a whisper. I thought I was gone." I squeezed her hand. "Not tonight." Amid the flurry of uniforms and equipment, moments of compassion shone through the disaster. A firefighter paused to cradle a toddler in his arms, soothing her cries. A pilot's voice crackled over a handheld radio, calling for calm and coordination. A nurse handed out rain ponchos and blankets from an ambulance trunk. In broken English, Spanish, and murmured Arabic, the survivors exchanged names, tears, and promises. "Tell my husband I love him. Call my mother. Don't let them forget us." As dawn's first light began to creep over the horizon, the inferno finally succumbed to water and foam. The last flickers of flame died, leaving a skeletal hulk of blackened metal. I sat on a curb by a row of ambulances, body shaking, eyes red. In that moment of exhaustion, the gravity of what had happened washed over me. The lives lost, the bodies still inside, the sheer randomness of survival. Yet as I watched the paramedics tend to each passenger, some carried away on stretchers, others walking with staff support, I felt a strange kinship. We had stared into the abyss together and emerged changed. The screams that had nearly broken me were quiet now, relegated to memory. But the outstretched hands, the rescuers' bravery, and the small acts of kindness would echo forever. I rose when a medic offered me a blanket. My body ached, my spirit trembled, but I stood. Ahead, they were loading survivors onto a bus bound for the hospital. One by one, we climbed aboard, silent but present. The bus doors closed, and as it pulled away from the crash site, I looked back at the broken fuselage, the glowing embers now cold. I exhaled, letting the quiver in my chest subside. We were alive, and though the terror would haunt us, so too would the strength that it carried us through. The bus rumbled along the deserted service road, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom as we were ferried to the makeshift triage area set up in a hangar near the crash site. Inside, fluorescent bulbs revealed rows of cots draped with thin blankets. Medics moved with calm urgency, checking vitals and offering quiet reassurances. The hangar's cavernous interior echoed with the soft hum of ventilators and the distant murmur of anxious families. Here, amid the antiseptic smell of alcohol swabs and the steady beep of monitors, the living and injured found sanctuary from the chaos. I collapsed onto a cot, legs trembling so violently I feared they wouldn't hold me. A nurse draped a warm blanket over my shoulders and placed a cold pack against my forehead. "You did well out there," she said, her voice both kind and professional. I shut my eyes, the memory of the fuselage's shriek replaying behind my lids. Every nerve burned, the sting of smoke in my lungs, the hardness of the metal frame against my back, the frantic pulse of fear. Yet beneath it all was something else, survivor's guilt, a hollow ache that whispered I had no right to live when so many had perished. The hangar doors hissed open as another survivor was brought in, this time a flight attendant with blood-soaked sleeves and a vacant stare. Two paramedics wheeled her past me, her eyes unfocused, lips parting in a silent wail. I reached out, grasping her hand. Her skin was clammy, her pulse erratic. "You're safe now," I whispered. She blinked, and in that moment recognition flickered before her gaze drifted away again, lost to the darkness within. The paramedics exchanged glances and urged me to rest. I let go, but her damp fingers lingered in mine like a plea for connection. Around me, the hangar pulsed with activity. A doctor crouched by a young man whose leg was splinted and bandaged. The man's eyes locked onto the ceiling, as if searching for meaning in the exposed rafters. A child no older than 6 sat beside her mother, a single tear carving a clean line through the soot on her cheek. The mother rocked back and forth, murmuring lullabies in a trembling voice. Though I could not understand the language, Gujarati as I later learned, the tenderness was universal. Beyond the medical bays lay an area cordoned off for counseling. Psychologists, crisis workers, and volunteers offered hot tea and tissue boxes, chairs arranged in comforting circles. Survivors trickled in, each face etched with shock, disbelief, and relief. I joined a small group, a pilot whose uniform still bore the scorch marks of flame, a businessman in a singed jacket, eyes hollow, and an elderly woman clutching a photograph of her late husband. We sat in silence for several minutes until a counselor spoke softly. "This is a safe space. Whatever you feel, fear, anger, sorrow, it's all valid." Tears came easily then. Tears for the friends who hadn't made it, for the voices that had fallen silent, and for the raw, unfiltered ache of survival. I found my thoughts drifting to the outside world, news reporters crouched behind microphones broadcasting live from the perimeter, flickering TV screens in homes across America showing grainy footage of the burning wing, social media feeds ablaze with eyewitness videos, hashtags, and tributes. Images of Flight 317's tail emblazoned on every channel, the odd angle of the wing snapped off like a broken limb, the charred fuselage against the dark field. I felt exposed, as though my private terror had become public spectacle. A volunteer approached, offering me a cup of coffee and a small packet of crackers. "Eat something," she urged gently. Hunger clawed at my stomach. I realized I'd barely breathed since the crash. I sipped the coffee, bitter, strong, and sat up straighter. Across the aisle, a young woman covered in soot spoke with a structural engineer, her brow furrowed as she pointed out the crumpled panels of the cabin in a sketch she'd drawn on a notepad. Even amid trauma, the impulse to understand, to piece together the puzzle of what had happened, thrummed like a heartbeat. Later, as daylight streamed through the hangar's high windows, I accompanied two paramedics outside to watch the final salvage operations. Cranes lifted the fuselage sections one by one, laying them onto flatbed trucks bound for the investigation site. Engineers and federal investigators snapped photos, measured angles, and marked debris with fluorescent tags. I saw Maria, the flight attendant who had braved the corridor during the descent, standing at the edge of the tarmac. Her face was streaked with tears and soot, yet in her eyes I recognized the same fierce determination that had guided her through the cabin. She caught my gaze and gave a small, weary nod, a silent acknowledgement of survival. That evening, back in a sterile hospital room, the world felt both impossibly vast and claustrophobically small. Visitors whispered prayers outside the door, corridors echoed with the footsteps of nurses on their rounds. Alone, I pressed the back of my hand against the window, watching the hangar lights flicker like stars. The screams may have faded, but their echoes lingered in my mind, a chorus of fear and hope, of tragedy and resilience. In the quiet hush, I vowed to carry those echoes forward, not as spectral ghosts, but as reminders of every heartbeat that refused to stop, of every hand that reached out in the dark, and of the fragile, unbreakable will to survive. Late that night, sleep came only in fitful bursts, each one haunted by flickers of the crash replaying behind my closed eyelids. I awoke drenched in sweat, ears ringing with phantom screams. Despite the layers of blankets and the hum of the hospital's ventilator, I felt exposed, still drifting on the edge between survival and oblivion. Each inhalation reminded me of the smoke searing my lungs. Each creak of the bed frame echoed the fuselage's final groan. When the morning light filtered through the curtains, I steeled myself to face my reflection. The mirror in the bathroom revealed bloodshot eyes framed by smudged soot, skin pale as porcelain. My hair was matted with sweat and ash. I hardly recognized the person staring back. This shell of exhaustion and fear was a far cry from the version of me who boarded Flight 317 hours earlier. Yet beneath the bruises and the trembling, I detected something else, a fragile ember of resolve. A knock at the door announced Maria, the flight attendant who had been our steadfast guardian through the worst of the disaster. She entered quietly, carrying 2 steaming paper cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, offering one to me. Her uniform was crisp now, clean, a stark contrast to the singed fabric she'd worn on the plane. Fatigue lined her face, but her eyes held a warmth that offered solace. "Thank you," I whispered, gripping the cup like a lifeline. The coffee was lukewarm, but its bitterness grounded me. Maria sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling slowly. "How are you feeling?" she asked, hands clasped over her knees. "I'm here," I said, voice cracking. "I keep hearing them, the screams." She nodded, gaze steady. "You're not alone. Most of us do. I still hear them sometimes, especially when it's quiet." Her words were simple, yet they held the weight of shared experience. Maria told me that she'd been reassigned to helping with the investigation, providing statements, comforting families, assisting the counseling team. She spoke softly of the passengers she'd guided to safety, the ones she couldn't reach, and the bitter guilt that haunted her in the dark hours. But she also spoke of the light that shone in moments of crisis, the stranger who shielded a child from falling debris, the engineer who crawled back into the cabin to retrieve medical supplies, the pilot who refused to leave his co-pilot's side until help arrived. "We did what we could," she said, "and we lived. That matters." As the day wore on, I joined a debriefing session with fellow survivors. A specially trained crisis coordinator guided us through simple exercises, breathing techniques, grounding strategies, a brief group sharing of our experiences. We sat in a circle of folding chairs, each of us raw and vulnerable. When it was my turn to speak, I described the lull before the crash, the snap of metal, the heat, the smoke, and the faces frozen in terror. My voice faltered, but when I finished, the group nodded in understanding. No judgment, only recognition. A father of 2 children placed a gentle hand on mine. "You're safe now," he said. Later, I lay on a cot in the rehabilitation wing, attending to the shallow wounds and bruises that mottled my arms and legs. A physical therapist guided me through simple stretches, reminding me that every movement, however painful, was a step toward recovery. She encouraged me to focus on the present moment, the stretch of muscle, the scent of disinfectant, the sound of her steady instructions. Each acknowledgement of my body's strength, she said, was an affirmation of survival. That evening, I found myself walking the hospital corridors, cradling a steaming mug of tea from the cafeteria. The building hummed with institutional calm. Nurses charting at stations, a child's laughter echoing from a playroom, the soft click of shoes on linoleum. I paused by a large window overlooking a moonlit courtyard. The cracked moonlight shimmered on a fountain's still surface. In that silent reflection, I felt a fragile peace. The world continued beyond the catastrophe, waiting for me to rejoin it. I pulled out my phone and hesitated before scrolling through the barrage of news alerts. Exclusive survivor interview. Flight 317 mystery deepens. Crash victims remembered. My heart pounded at the thought of reliving the horror in headlines and sound bites. I turned it off, placing the phone face down on a nearby chair. Some stories would need telling, but on my terms, not as fodder for sensationalism. Before returning to my room, I stopped by the hospital's family liaison area where anxious relatives waited for updates. I saw the elderly woman from the hangar clutching the photograph of her husband. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "You made it," she whispered, voice thick with tears. I embraced her, feeling the tremor in her frame. "We all made it," I replied, gently clasping her hand. The gratitude in her gaze was balm to my spirit. That night, I lay in the hospital bed and finally drifted into sleep, free of screams for a time, finding rest in the cyclical hush of my own breathing. Somewhere in the deep of my mind, the ember of resolve glowed brighter, a testament to the will that had carried me through the fire. I promised myself that I would shape this brush with death into a story of resilience, compassion, and the unbreakable threads that bind us when the world falls apart. In the days that followed, the roar of emergency sirens was replaced by a different kind of clamor. The clicking of camera shutters, the hushed questions of reporters, and the hum of airwaves broadcasting our every word. I sat at a long table flanked by other survivors, each of us trembling in the bright glare of television lights. A banner behind us read, "Flight 317, Survivor Press Conference," stark against the sterile airport terminal walls. As I fastened the small microphone to my lapel, the weight of responsibility pressed on my chest. Our testimony would shape how the world remembered this disaster. I cleared my throat. Around me, I saw the haunted eyes of the pilot, the trembling hands of a flight attendant, the rigid posture of a businessman in a freshly pressed suit that had once been singed and stained. A hush fell over the assembled crowd of journalists. "Thank you," I began, voice steady despite the flutter in my stomach. "On behalf of all survivors, I stand here to share the story of that night, not to sensationalize our pain, but to honor those who did not make it and to remind everyone that behind every statistic is a human life." Questions came in a rapid volley. What did you hear? What did you see? Could anything have been done differently? For a moment, I hesitated. The screams clawed at my throat. But I remembered Maria's words. To bear witness is to give meaning to suffering. So I spoke, my voice echoing through the cavernous terminal. I heard the screams until the end. I heard them in the minutes before impact when the cabin shuddered like a wild beast. I heard them on the wing as flames consumed our hopes. I heard them in the distance as first responders raced toward us. But I also heard something else. Quiet voices calling for help, hands reaching out to strangers, a single word uttered in fear. "Stay with me." I paused, swallowing hard. Those voices deserve to be heard. In the aftermath of our testimonies, the investigation into Flight 317 intensified. Federal Aviation Administration officials combed through maintenance logs, pilot training records, and air traffic control transcripts. Engineers reconstructed the black box data, revealing a sudden loss of hydraulic pressure, followed by an alarmingly steep descent. Conspiracy theories proliferated online. Sabotage? Mechanical failure? Pilot error? Late-night pundits dissected every angle, while voice actors reenacted our final moments for shock-value documentaries. Amid the swirl of speculation, a different narrative began to emerge, one rooted in compassion rather than controversy. A documentary filmmaker, moved by our words, approached the survivors group with an offer to craft a film that would focus not on the sensational details of the crash, but on the threads of humanity that bound us together. Lives lost and lives saved would share the same screen. The title proposed, "Echoes of Flight 317, Voices of Survivor." I agreed. Over weeks of filming, cameras captured tearful reunions between survivors and the rescuers who pulled them from wreckage. We recorded interviews in the homes of families mourning those who perished, capturing laughter, memories, and personal artifacts. A child's favorite stuffed animal, a businessman's worn briefcase, a flight attendant's uniform buttons polished and preserved. In each scene, the emphasis was clear. We were not defined solely by trauma, but by the strength we discovered in its wake. Premiered at a charity screening in Washington, D.C., the documentary swept audiences to their feet. The credits rolled over images of the cratered field at dusk, the twisted metal bathed in the glow of emergency lights, and finally, the faces of survivors emerging into the night. I watched beside Maria in a packed theater, her hand clasped in mine. As the final notes of the score faded, the audience rose in a standing ovation, an outpouring of empathy for a story they had only just begun to truly understand. With the film's release came calls for reform. Lawmakers cited our experiences during congressional hearings on aviation safety. New regulations were proposed to enhance cabin integrity, improve emergency egress procedures, and mandate additional mental health support for survivors and crew. Airlines across the country initiated voluntary safety reviews, while flight schools emphasized crisis management and passenger communication during emergencies. Yet, even as the world leaned in to listen, healing remained a personal journey. I continued therapy sessions with a trauma specialist, learning to disarm the triggers that turned ordinary sounds, thunder, fireworks, a dropped plate, into raw memories. I joined a support group where we met weekly to share our nightmares and our breakthroughs. Some days, the grief felt too heavy to bear. Other days, I would catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and see resilience shining back. One afternoon, 6 months after the crash, I met Maria and the young man whose arm I helped free from the wreckage at a firefighter appreciation luncheon. Firefighters, paramedics, and volunteers from that night were honored for their bravery. As we accepted a plaque inscribed "With gratitude for saving lives," I scanned the crowd and spotted the pilot we'd thought lost, standing tall despite the scars both visible and unseen. We huddled on the stage, 3 strangers once bound by fear and fire, now brothers and sisters in a shared story. That evening, as I walked past the memorial wall erected at the airport, etched with the names of the 52 souls who perished, I laid a single white rose at the base. The engraved letters glowed softly under the lamplight. I pressed my palm against the cool stone and whispered, "We hear you. We remember you. You live on in every voice that speaks your name." Behind me, the hum of departing planes continued unabated, each takeoff a testament to our refusal to be grounded by tragedy. As I walked away, I felt the echo of our collective heartbeat, the rhythm of survival that had begun with one person's testimony and had grown into a song of hope carried around the world. The months following the documentary's premiere were a blur of interviews, hospital visits, and quiet moments of reflection. Yet, beneath the whirlwind of media attention and safety hearings, a subtler transformation was underway, one that reshaped our daily lives, our relationships, and our understanding of what it meant to truly live. I moved into a modest apartment a few blocks from the hospital where I had been treated. The first morning I woke there, the sunlight spilled through gauzy curtains onto bare hardwood floors. I walked to the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee guiding me, and paused at the window, gazing at the city skyline. Planes arced across the sky like silver birds, indifferent to the fear they had once instilled in me. For a moment, I froze. Memories of flashing wing lights, the lurch of the descent, the terror. I could almost hear the final screams again. But then a deep breath filled my lungs, and I turned away, reminding myself I was not that person anymore. Returning to work was the next hurdle. My old office, once a place of routine presentations and polite small talk, felt suffocating. I remembered the quiet before the storm, coworkers passing by, the hum of air conditioning, mundane, comforting details now tinged with a fragility I could never unlearn. I spoke with my supervisor and arranged a phased return, starting with remote days. My colleagues listened, some wide-eyed, others hesitant to ask how I was really doing. I learned to say, "I'm healing," and left it at that, shielding them from the unspoken truths of nightmares and tremors that still lurked in the corners of my mind. Gradually, though, bridges began to rebuild. A coworker named Marcus reached out every morning, simply texting, "How are you today?" I realized that sharing honest answers, "Today, I'm okay," gave him permission to ask again when I was not. Another colleague organized a small gathering to celebrate my first week back in the office. Pizza, fizzy drinks, laughter echoing in a conference room that had once felt like a cage. In those moments, I felt the weight of my ordeal lift slightly, replaced by the warmth of being welcomed home. Outside work, I sought solace in volunteering with a local support organization for trauma survivors. Every week, I sat in a circle of strangers whose hurts ranged from car accidents to violent crimes. I listened to their stories, fractured memories, anger, despair. And in my turn, I shared the shards of my own experience. Together, we practiced grounding techniques, feeling our feet on the floor, naming 5 objects in the room, repeating affirmations like, "I am safe in this moment." There was power in collective vulnerability, in knowing that healing was not a solitary journey, but a path walked hand in hand with others. On weekends, I began taking classes at a community art center. Painting had been a forgotten hobby, replaced by deadlines and social engagements. With brush in hand, I let color bleed into water-soaked paper. Deep indigos for the night sky, bright oranges for the flames that had consumed the wing, soft greens for the grass where we had found refuge. Each stroke was an act of reclaiming my narrative, transforming pain into expression, terror into beauty. My first piece, titled "After the Fire," hung on the center's wall, a dark swirl calming into luminous light at the edges. Visitors paused before it, some nodding in quiet recognition. I felt seen. Family bonds, too, found new strength. My parents visited often, their eyes red from worry and relief. My mother taught me to cook again, simple recipes I had abandoned in the haze of recovery, and we laughed over spilled sauce and overcooked rice. My father sat beside me on the porch, teaching me to tend to a small vegetable garden. He showed me how to prune tomato plants, how to coax lettuce from the soil. Watching green shoots emerge each morning reminded me that growth could follow devastation, that life persisted even in charred earth. Perhaps the most profound shift came in the form of my relationship with fear itself. I once believed that avoiding reminders, news reports, airports, even the distant hum of engines would keep the trauma at bay. But true healing demanded confrontation. With my therapist's guidance, I took a short flight to a nearby city for a weekend retreat. As the plane ascended, my knuckles whitened on the armrests. The cabin lights hummed, masks dangling inert. My breath came fast, and I closed my eyes, repeating grounding phrases. This is a new journey. I am here. I am safe. When the flight leveled off, I dared to open my eyes. The clouds outside looked no different from the ones I had once drifted above. Soft, luminous, infinite. A gentle thrill stirred in my chest. I could fly again. The retreat itself was held in a rustic lodge nestled in the foothills of a mountain range. Mornings began with yoga on a deck overlooking pines, the crisp air filling our lungs. Afternoons were spent on hikes, footsteps crunching on forest floor, sunlight filtering through canopy. Evenings brought circle discussions by a crackling fire pit, stories shared over mugs of herbal tea, the glow of embers dancing on faces shaped by hope rather than fear. I watched the stars wheel overhead and felt the weight of darkness lift, replaced by awe at the vastness of the universe and our small, radiant place within it. When I returned home, I brought with me not only photographs and mementos, but a renewed belief that survival was not merely about enduring terror, but about discovering the depths of one's own resilience. I realized that the screams I had heard until the end had not been the final note. They were echoes, reminders that life's symphony includes both dissonance and harmony. One evening, as I prepared dinner in my apartment, the distant drone of an engine drew my gaze skyward. A passenger jet carved a silent path above the city lights. My heart fluttered, a mix of memory and anticipation. I exhaled slowly, reminding myself, I belong to this world, and this world is mine to reclaim. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the community center where I had returned to volunteer once again. Today, I led a workshop on resilience, inviting fellow survivors of Flight 317 and other traumas to share not only their stories of suffering, but also the ways they had found to rebuild. Around me sat a diverse group: teachers, factory workers, retirees, and students, each drawn together by the common thread of near death and the determination to live beyond it. I began by telling my own story. The way the cabin erupted in chaos, the taste of smoke in my lungs, the searing heat, and the cries that had threatened to drown me. But I moved quickly to the lessons I had gleaned. The power of a single comforting hand, the healing found in art and nature, and the liberation that came from confronting fear head-on. Survival, I concluded, is not just an act of endurance. It is a testament to the human capacity for connection, creativity, and courage. Hands rose. A woman in her 20s who'd survived a tornado spoke of rediscovering joy through dance. A retired firefighter described writing poetry to process the grief of losing comrades. A high school student shared how planting a rooftop garden helped him regrow his trust in living things. Each story wove into the next, forming a tapestry rich with color and texture, no longer defined by a single thread of tragedy, but by an intricate pattern of rebirth. After the workshop, I stepped outside to the courtyard, where survivors and volunteers mingled beneath blooming magnolia trees. Maria was there, her uniform replaced by a simple blouse and jeans, her presence calm and familiar. We embraced, sharing a silent acknowledgement of all we had endured together. She gestured toward a small group clustered around a table laden with snacks and refreshments. I recognized several faces from that night. The young man with the healed arm, now laughing as he recounted a joke. The mother whose child had clutched a singed teddy bear, now watching her daughter chase bubbles across the lawn. I joined them, and soon our conversation drifted from trauma to hope. Career plans, family milestones, travel dreams previously shelved out of fear. The world felt vast again, full of possibility rather than peril. We spoke of forming a permanent support network, not just for Flight 317 survivors, but for anyone recovering from crisis. The idea resonated, a fellowship born out of fire, dedicated to spreading empathy and resilience. That evening, I attended a fundraising gala organized in our group's honor. Held in a grand ballroom of a nearby hotel, it glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished mahogany floors. Survivors shared the stage with first responders and mental health professionals, accepting awards for bravery and compassion. As I walked across the platform to receive the Beacon of Hope honor, I felt the weight of dozens of hands clapping in unison, each clap a promise that our voices would continue to shine light into dark places. In my acceptance speech, I looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, many new, and said, "We rose from the wreckage not only because we survived, but because we chose to transform our pain into purpose. Let us carry forward every scar as a reminder that even the deepest wounds can give rise to the strongest bonds." Weeks later, I found myself at the crash site memorial again, this time with members of our support network. We stood in a circle, candles flickering in the twilight. Each person spoke a name, holding a white rose aloft before laying it at the foot of the stone monument. When my turn came, I whispered the names of all 52 souls we had lost, friends whose stories I had promised never to forget. The night air was still, broken only by the soft murmur of voices and the rustle of petals. As we dispersed, I lingered beneath the vast expanse of stars. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, the fragrance of magnolias drifting on a breeze that carried the echoes of our journey, from terror to survival to solidarity. In that moment, I understood that our story would continue long after the embers cooled. It would live in every workshop taught, every painting made, every hand held in the dark. I turned toward home, the path lit by lanterns and the glow of distant terminal lights. Ahead lay new adventures, new challenges, and countless opportunities to spread the message we had forged, that even in our darkest hour, the human spirit can ignite a blaze of hope that illuminates the world. Morning sunlight filtered through the slatted blinds of my apartment, drawing pale lines across the hardwood floor. The world beyond felt both unfathomably large and intimately close. The city's hum a constant reminder that life marched on, even when my own heartbeat still raced with echoes of that fateful night. Today, I had a meeting with the head of a local veterans organization, exploring the possibility of collaborating on peer support programs. It was a step I never imagined taking when I first crawled from the wreckage of Flight 317, but one that felt profoundly right. forging connections between survivors of disparate traumas, united by the need to heal. I dressed with deliberate care, jeans, a simple blouse, and the silver pendant Maria had given me, engraved with the words "Strength through Unity." As I locked my door, I ran my hand over the cool metal, recalling how she had pressed it into my palm amid the chaos, urging me to remember that I was not alone. The memory was bittersweet but grounding, a tether to the resolve that had carried me through the darkest hours. The Veterans Center sat in a converted church near the edge of town, its stained glass windows now replaced with frosted panes, and its pews transformed into rows of mismatched chairs. I was greeted by Colonel Harris, a stern-faced man whose posture spoke of decades in uniform. At first, his handshake was firm, formal, then softened when he noticed the faint scar across my forearm, the souvenir of metal twisted too close to skin. "I know loss," he said quietly, leading me into a sunlit community room. We settled into chairs around a low table, scattered with pamphlets about PTSD, meditation groups, and volunteer opportunities. As I spoke of the Survivors Network, our weekly workshops, art therapy sessions, and crisis hotlines, his expression shifted from polite curiosity to engaged interest. "We've been looking to broaden our outreach," Colonel Harris admitted. "You've built something impressive after your ordeal. Perhaps our veterans and your survivors could learn from each other." The idea felt like a bridge spanning two worlds: men and women who would face danger on battlefields, and civilians who had stared into the abyss at 30,000 feet. "Let's plan a joint retreat," I offered, "a weekend of shared stories and mutual support." He nodded, smile cracking his stoic veneer. "Welcome aboard." Leaving the center, I carried a folder of brochures in one hand and unexpected hope in my heart. The collaboration would launch in a month's time, enough for careful planning, but soon enough to keep the momentum alive. As I walked to the bus stop, I spotted a young mother with a stroller, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. For a moment, I saw her as I once was, braced for disaster, scanning the skies for safety. I offered a gentle nod, and she returned it with a grateful smile. It was a small gesture, but today it felt momentous, a quiet reminder that empathy could reach across any divide. That afternoon, I joined the art therapy class I'd started teaching at the Community Art Center. 12 eager participants sat around long tables, paintbrushes poised over blank canvases. Some arrived with hesitant glances, as though unsure whether they belonged. Others greeted me like old friends. I began by asking them to close their eyes and picture a place of safety, real or imagined. Soft acoustic guitar music played in the background. When I counted down from 3, brushes dipped into pots of cerulean blue, emerald green, and burnt sienna, translating inner landscapes onto paper. A young man whose hands trembled revealed a painting of a storm-tossed sea with a single sailboat battling the waves. A veteran depicted a battlefield turning to meadow, poppies blooming where tanks once treads. A flight attendant who'd survived a different crash painted a calm sunset over a desert plain. Each image spoke volumes, of fear confronted, of transformation, of beauty emerging from pain. I guided them gently, offering prompts. What colors bring you peace? Where do you feel grounded? While reminding them that no artistic skill was required, only honest expression. By the time the session ended, the room buzzed with quiet excitement. People swapped stories about their work, a teacher grappling with burnout, a firefighter haunted by a colleague's death, a nurse still trembling at the memory of a chaotic ER night. Yet amid these revelations, laughter blossomed, over spilled paint, over shared moments of absurdity, over the relief of being truly heard. As we packed up, one participant pulled me aside and pressed a folded note into my palm. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've given us a chance to find our voices again." That evening, I returned home to the gentle hum of my refrigerator and the aroma of simmering soup. I sank onto the couch, tucking a soft blanket around my legs. My phone buzzed with messages, one from Marcus, checking in, Another from Maria, sharing photos of her newborn nephew, and a text from Colonel Harris, confirming our retreat schedule. I responded with gratitude and leant back, letting the day's accomplishments wash over me. Before sleep claimed me, I closed my eyes and let my thoughts drift to the upcoming weekend retreat. Tents pitched beneath pine trees, campfire conversations under star-studded skies, survivors and veterans blending song and silence in equal measure. I imagined the crackle of embers, the warmth of shared stories, the emergence of hope like new dawn light. And as the first tendrils of dreams beckoned, I realized that peace was not a distant destination. It was a journey stitched together by every hand offered, every scar acknowledged, and every voice raised in solidarity. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the university auditorium as I took my place behind the lectern. Rows of seats stretched before me. Students, faculty, and members of the public gathered for the annual Voices of Resilience speaker series. My heart fluttered with a familiar mix of anticipation and vulnerability. This was not a mandate driven by headline news or government hearings. It was an invitation to share the lessons of Flight 317 with young minds poised to shape the future. I glanced at the first slide projected behind me, a close-up of the silver pendant Maria had given me, its inscription, "Strength through Unity," catching the light. Below it lay a simple question: what does it mean to witness and to act? I took a breath and began. 10 months ago, I said, voice steady but earnest, I heard the screams until the end. I stood amid twisted metal and billowing smoke, convinced that I was witnessing the end of my story. A murmur rippled through the audience. I paused, letting them feel the weight of that moment before continuing. But survival was only the beginning. From that crucible of terror emerged a new purpose: to bear witness, to record the raw truth of human fragility and human courage, and to ensure that our experience serves as a guide, both practical and moral, for those who follow. I clicked to the next slide, a black and white photograph of the crash site at dawn. This image shows the physical aftermath: charred wings, pulverized fuselage, scorched earth. But the real wreckage, I said, lowering my voice, is interior. The shattering of trust in a routine we take for granted, the plunge into helplessness when control slips through our fingers. I scanned the room. Faces were rapt, some eyes glistening with empathy. Over the next 40 minutes, I wove together 3 threads: preparedness versus panic. I recounted how clear, calm instructions from crew members and the choice to brace properly made the difference between life and death. I urged listeners to recognize that preparedness, mental, physical, and emotional, begins long before a crisis hits. Learn basic first aid, I said. Practice mindfulness so that, faced with chaos, your mind can anchor itself in a breath rather than a scream. Compassion in crisis. I described the stranger who shielded a child from falling debris and the engineer who sacrificed his own safety to retrieve medical supplies. Compassion is not a weakness. It is the mortar that keeps communities strong when walls crumble. In any disaster, natural, man-made, or personal, compassion turns bystanders into heroes. The power of narrative. I spoke of my journey from silence to storytelling, how speaking truth healed wounds, and how listening to other stories binds us in shared humanity. When we tell our truths, I said, we forge connections that transcend fear, geography, and culture. Stories become blueprints for resilience. As I wrapped up, I invited questions. Hands shot up. A student asked how I coped with survivor's guilt. I answered honestly, by transforming guilt into action, supporting others, advocating for safety improvements, and mentoring those who struggle to find meaning. Another asked for advice on dealing with trauma in the workplace. I shared simple strategies, establishing peer support circles, promoting mental health days, and integrating moments of mindfulness into daily routines. When the applause came, it was sustained, gentle at first, then growing until it filled the hall. I stepped back, the lectern no longer a barrier between my story and theirs, but a bridge. Later that afternoon, I signed books at a small table in the campus bookstore. The memoir I had written, Echoes of Flight 317, laid open, its pages heavy with memory. A former Air Force pilot approached, her eyes bright. "Your words helped me finally talk about my own crash," she said. "Thank you." I remembered Colonel Harris's encouragement to connect with veterans. This felt like that moment come full circle, my story giving voice to others' unspoken truths. As evening fell, I returned home to find a package on my doorstep. Inside lay a simple wooden box from Maria, containing the original pendant, now polished, and a handwritten note. "Your voice is the lantern that guides many out of darkness. Keep speaking." I clutched the pendant and smiled, tears pricking at my eyes. From survivor to storyteller, it had been a journey forged in fire and tempered by compassion. This chapter of my life would remain in the telling, each recounting a chance to remind the world that, amid terror, we choose resilience. Amid fragmentation, we choose unity. And amid silence, we choose to speak. Dawn broke over the horizon with a pale promise, casting long shafts of golden light across the tarmac where Flight 317 had once lain in flame. Standing at the edge of the Memorial Plaza, I inhaled deeply, tasting the crisp morning air. Every breath carried echoes of that night, the roar of engines, the searing heat, the cries of fear. And yet now, in the hush before the world awoke, those echoes felt transformed, tempered by time, softened by distance, and permeated with the quiet strength of survival. Today marked 1 year since the crash, and the airport had organized a commemorative ceremony. Survivors, family members, rescuers, and community leaders gathered beneath a canopy of fluttering flags. A gentle breeze carried petals released in memory of the 52 souls who never trekked down the inflatable slide, and whose names were inscribed on the stone wall behind us. I approached the microphone, the polished silver pendant at my throat warming against my skin, a tangible symbol of the unity forged in the crucible of tragedy. "Thank you for being here," I began, voice steady but rich with emotion. 1 year ago, we bore witness to an event that forever altered our lives. Today, we honor those we lost, celebrate those who survived, and recommit ourselves to the lessons we learned in the face of fear. Behind me, the morning sun illuminated the engraved names: Michael and Sophia Alvarez, Joshua Chang, Aisha Patel, each name a world unto itself. I spoke of how grief taught me the depth of compassion, how survivor's guilt spurred me to action, and how the solidarity of strangers blossomed into networks that reached across borders and experiences. When the fuselage fractured, I said, our faith in safety fractured with it. Yet, through fractured courage and fragmented hope, we discovered that our greatest strength lies not in invulnerability, but in our ability to stand together when all else falls away. A hush fell as I recounted stories of everyday heroism: the young student who improvised a makeshift tourniquet from a scarf, the off-duty pilot who remained calm and guided passengers through smoke, the volunteer who, weeks later, organized a benefit concert where survivors and first responders performed side by side. These acts, I told them, were the embers that kept the fire of our collective spirit alight. After my address, we observed a moment of silence. The only sound was a solitary bugle playing taps, its notes drifting across the open field. Eyes closed, I felt the convergence of past and present, the terror that once seized my heart, the healing work of the year, and the promise of days yet to come. When taps ended, a chorus of voices began to sing, an impromptu, multilingual rendition of "Lean on Me," echoing the cooperation that had carried us through. We joined hands in a circle around the monument, survivors and responders, friends and strangers alike, united by the knowledge that our shared humanity transcends any disaster. Later, at a reception held in a nearby hangar repurposed as a community gallery, I moved among displays of artwork, photographs, and journal excerpts created over the past year. There was the painting titled Flight of Hope, in which 12 survivors had painted 12 birds taking flight. A painstakingly detailed scale model of the airplane, complete with annotations on safety improvements inspired by our testimonies. And a collection of letters written by children to people on airplanes, promising to pray and stay calm. I paused before a photograph of Maria standing in the cabin doorway, her hand extended to a terrified passenger, a snapshot of courage embodied. I pressed my palm to my chest, recalling how that single gesture had ripple effected across my life and the lives of countless others. As the afternoon waned, I found a quiet corner beside a window overlooking the runway. A new flight taxied in, its engines purring softly as it prepared for takeoff. Passengers disembarked, families reunited, solo travelers with backpacks, business people striding through the jetway. I watched them move, their faces alive with everyday purpose, unshadowed by the horrors I once imagined awaited them miles above. A gentle peace settled over me. I realized that our story, born in the wreckage of Flight 317, had transcended the confines of that airplane. It had seeded workshops on crisis response, inspired legislation to improve cabin safety, and nurtured friendships between survivors and service members. Most importantly, it had taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward in spite of it. Pocketing the last rose from the memorial display, I stepped outside into the falling light of late afternoon. Overhead, planes departed as effortlessly as birds gliding from a ledge. With each one that rose, I whispered a silent benediction, for safe journeys, for the resilience of the human spirit, and for the knowledge that while we cannot choose the storms that come our way, we can choose how we weather them and how we lift one another when the winds howl fiercest.